The taxi smelled faintly of diesel and last night's cigarettes. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window, trying to focus on the blur of streetlights instead of the stabbing in my side. It was a sharp, deliberate pain, like someone was twisting a blade deeper with every breath. My hands kept drifting to my abdomen as if I could hold the source of the agony still. Sweat gathered at my hairline and trickled down my neck, dampening the edges of my hijab. My sleeves were stiff with a sour residue of vomit, a humiliating souvenir from the bumpy ride here. St. Meredith's Hospital loomed ahead like an old adversary. I had walked through those sliding glass doors countless times before, but, always in a white coat with a clipboard in hand, greeted with nods and deference. I knew these hallways better than my own apartment. This was where I'd spent 18 hours in the operating theater, painstakingly separating two tiny bodies joined at the chest, hearts beating a precarious duet. The surgery had been called miraculous. I had been called the miracle worker. Now, as the taxi rolled to a stop, I wasn't sure I'd even make it to the front desk. The driver muttered something about the fare, but his voice seemed to come from a tunnel. I paid him blindly, my fingers clumsy, and pushed the door open. The night air was sharp and metallic, laced with the faint antiseptic tang drifting from the hospital. I forced one foot in front of the other, each step a negotiation with my own body. The sliding doors parted with their usual hiss, but tonight it sounded more like a warning than a welcome. The emergency department was a study in controlled chaos. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air heavy with disinfectant and human weariness. A toddler wailed somewhere behind the partition, the sharp scent of antiseptic mixing with the faint iron tang of blood. A television mounted to the wall played a muted news broadcast that no one was watching, and there, behind the front desk, sat Nurse Brenda. She was hunched over the keyboard, acrylic nails clacking with brisk efficiency. Her eyeliner was sharp enough to cut glass, and her lips were painted the same deep red as a drop of fresh blood. I had crossed paths with her before, not enough to know her personally, but enough to remember the way she looked at people. That slow, clinical up and down that told you she had already decided what kind of patient you were before you spoke. Her fingers froze mid-keystroke when she noticed me. Her eyes moved, hijab, face, the way I clutched my right side. I could almost hear her filing the information away. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't ask for my name. She simply lifted one hand from the keyboard and pointed to the farthest corner of the waiting room, the seat by the flickering light, as far from the nurse's station as possible. No words, just the silent direction of someone assigning an object to its place. I obeyed, because in that moment, walking across the room felt like climbing a mountain. The tile floor was cold under my shoes, each step sending a jolt of white-hot pain up my spine. My breath came in shallow, careful bursts. A few heads turned as I passed, eyes lingering not in concern, but with that polite detachment people use when they don't want to get involved. The chair in the corner felt like it was a mile away. I sank into it slowly, my pulse thudding in, my ears. The yellowed plastic armrests were sticky under my palms. Somewhere nearby, a vending machine hummed with the quiet arrogance of machinery that had never known pain. I fixed my gaze on the clock mounted above the triage desk, the long red second hand slicing time into neat, merciless increments. Brenda was already back to typing, her head bent low, the glow of the computer screen casting her face in a ghostly light. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had just weighed me, measured me, and found me undeserving before I'd even had the chance to open my mouth. I pressed my hands against my abdomen again and tried to steady my breathing. I'd been on the other side of this desk so many times, the side that decided who was seen first, who waited, who was urgent, and who was stable enough to hold. I knew triage inside and out, and I also knew something else. If they thought you could wait, they'd let you wait, sometimes to your detriment, sometimes until it was too late. The pain spiked again, hot and vicious. I bit the inside of my cheek to stop the sound that wanted to escape. The clock ticked on, each movement of the second hand pulling me deeper into the knowledge that something about tonight was already going wrong. The chair beneath me was a molded plastic relic, its surface slick from years of disinfectant, and the lingering humidity of too many bodies pressed against it. 2 hours I had been in that seat, 2 hours of shifting my weight from one side to the other, trying to find a position that didn't send a sharp jolt through my abdomen. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee, a stale blend that clung to the back of my throat. Somewhere behind the reception desk, a printer sputtered every few minutes, spitting out forms that landed with a slap on the counter. The rhythmic hum of the ventilation system filled the silences between muffled coughs and the squeak of sneakers across linoleum. The waiting room wasn't large, but it had the illusion of size thanks to the glass wall facing the parking lot. The sun had already started to dip, its light filtering in at an angle that caught every fingerprint and smudge on the glass. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, but the neatness was deceptive. Some people sat with their legs sprawled into the aisles. Others hunched forward, elbows on knees, heads bowed toward phones. A television mounted high on the wall cycled between daytime talk shows and pharmaceutical ads. The volume turned low enough to make the voices tinny and strained. I couldn't have told you what was on the screen. I was too busy watching the people. I've always been an observer, a habit born from years of clinical work, where noticing a small tremor in a hand or a wince in the corner of an eye could change a diagnosis. Even now, long removed from the crisp whites of my lab coat, that instinct didn't leave me. The elderly man with the cane, seated near the door, tapped the metal tip against the floor in a slow, restless rhythm. The teenager in the far corner drummed his fingers on his knee, his eyes darting toward the clock every few minutes. The woman with him, his mother, I assumed, sat stiffly, her purse clutched to her lap like a shield. The clock above the reception desk ticked forward in a way that felt both deliberate and mock shocking. Each second was an audible reminder of my place in the queue. And yet, patients who had come in long after me kept disappearing through those swinging double doors that led deeper into the clinic. Every time the doors opened, I caught a flash of the brighter, cleaner interior, the world beyond this purgatory. Every time they closed, it felt like the gate had slammed shut again. The pain in my side pulsed in time with my heartbeat, a low, insistent drum that refused to be ignored. I shifted again, wincing, and caught the receptionist, Brenda, her name tag read, glancing in my direction. It wasn't the kind of glance that acknowledged me as a patient in discomfort. It was the fleeting, flat look of someone categorizing, filing away, making silent calculations about where and if I fit into the immediate priority list. I recognized that look all too well. I told myself not to read into it. Not yet. There were protocols, after all. Emergencies came first, and appearances could be deceiving. I knew this. I had lived by this code once. But as the minutes stretched into hours, as one by one others were ushered forward while I remained, the seed of unease began to sprout in the back of my mind. I leaned back against the chair, folding my arms to ward off the slight chill from the air conditioning. My scarf, a deep teal today, was neatly pinned, though the fabric felt heavier than usual, warm against my skin under the artificial light. I adjusted it absently, telling myself it was habit, not nerves. Still, I couldn't shake the sensation that it was being noticed, and not in the way a person notices a well-chosen accessory. By the 90-minute mark, my patience had frayed to a thin thread. I began cataloging the sequence: who had arrived, who had been called, how quickly each had been taken in. The patterns were hard to ignore. An elderly couple arrived, called within minutes. A boy with his mother barely waited at all. A man with a sprained wrist, ushered through almost instantly. And me, still here. The waiting room began to feel less like a neutral space, and more like a stage where a performance was unfolding. One I had been excluded from. Everyone else seemed to have a role: patient, companion, efficient nurse, while I remained an observer, stuck in my seat, watching the play go on without me. My name, printed neatly on the chart, was my ticket to join them. But as the clock edged closer to the 2-hour mark, I began to wonder if anyone intended to read it. The silence in the room stretched for a beat after her interruption. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent light above, its cold glow making the white walls seem even more sterile. Somewhere beyond the thin door, a cart rattled past, the uneven wheels giving it a staccato rhythm that faded into the distance. Her words, "You probably don't even know what that is," didn't just dismiss my knowledge, they erased it. In that moment, I wasn't a patient with symptoms worth investigating, or a woman with a medical degree and years of surgical training. I was only what she chose to see, someone wrapped in fabric she associated with ignorance. Kept my posture straight, though the pull in my abdomen was worsening. A dull ache was sharpening into something that felt like it could split me open from the inside. I shifted my weight, but standing still was making it worse. I wanted to sit, to curl forward, but her stance, feet planted apart, clipboard tucked, under one arm, told me that permission would have to be earned. She clicked her pen, the sound small but precise, like a metronome. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her tone flat, devoid of the small verbal cues most nurses use to encourage patients to share. "Since last night," I answered, keeping my voice calm. "The pain started as a dull pressure, then localized to the right side this morning. It's been getting steadily worse." She cut me off again. The sound wasn't acknowledgement. It was skepticism made audible. She jotted something down, her handwriting quick, angular, impatient, and then set the clipboard aside. Without warning, she reached for the blood pressure cuff. "Arm," she said, not bothering to phrase it as a request. I extended my left arm. The cuff tightened with mechanical precision, squeezing until my fingers tingled. She glanced at the reading and scribbled it down without comment. The whole time, she avoided my eyes. It was as though making direct contact might risk recognizing me as a person, rather than a problem to be processed. I wanted to tell her that I had spent years in operating theaters, that I had seen enough appendicitis, cases to diagnose one from across a room, that I wasn't here because I was fragile or afraid of discomfort. I was here because my body was telling me this was different, dangerous, but I knew how it would sound in this context: defensive, confrontational, and in her eyes, confirmation that I was difficult. Instead, I said nothing. The words I didn't speak pressed against the inside of my mouth like a tide, but I held them there. When she finally gestured toward the examination table, I moved toward it slowly, each step pulling at the inflamed tissue inside me. I eased myself onto the edge, my palms braced against the cool vinyl surface. She adjusted her glasses and opened a drawer, pulling out a pair of gloves. The snap of the latex was loud in the small room. "Lie back," she instructed. I complied, staring up at the ceiling tiles, speckled white squares, one of them stained faintly yellow in the corner. The fluorescent light hummed steadily overhead, washing the room in a cold, unflattering glare. Her hands pressed against my abdomen, starting at the left side. Her touch wasn't cruel, but it wasn't gentle either, impersonal, as though she were pressing on a countertop to test its sturdiness. When she reached the right side, the pain made me catch my breath. My abdominal muscles clenched involuntarily under her fingertips. She said again, as if that one syllable could encapsulate all she thought of me and my body. It happened so suddenly that my mind couldn't keep pace with my body. One moment, I was still clinging to the thin, pitiful thread of composure I had been trying to maintain for hours. The next, her hands were on me, sharp, impatient, uninvited. I didn't have time to flinch, to pull back, to even register what was happening before I felt the tug. My hijab, the piece of fabric that had been wrapped snugly around my hair and neck since early morning, the piece of fabric that was not just cloth but protection, dignity, and devotion, was ripped away in one abrupt motion. The sound it made was soft, but to me it was deafening. A faint whoosh of fabric sliding against my hair, a a crack in the air where safety used to be. My scalp tingled, not just from the sudden exposure to the cool hospital air, but from the violation itself. My hand shot up instinctively, desperate to reclaim it, but she was already holding it away from me, dangling it in one fist like a soiled rag she couldn't wait to discard. Her voice came next, low but carrying, tinged with the self-satisfaction of someone who believed her own justification before she even said it. Proper ID verification, she muttered, the phrase as mechanical as a security protocol, yet dripping with condescension. The words were for the room, not for me. An announcement that what she had done was official, sanctioned, necessary. As if humiliating me in public was the same as scanning a barcode, I stood frozen for a fraction of a second that felt like a lifetime. My mind raced to connect the pieces. Why she had done it, what she thought she would accomplish, what ID verification even meant in a hospital where my legal documents were already in her possession. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard that I could hear the rush of blood in my ears. The sterile white light overhead seemed to glare hotter, sharper, like a spotlight designed to amplify my vulnerability. Then came the pain. She didn't just reach out to examine me. She pressed, no, drove, her fingers deep into the exact spot on my abdomen that had been throbbing all day. Her nails dug in just enough to sting, but it was the blunt force of her knuckles and the precision of her aim that made me gasp. My knees buckled under the sudden searing pain. It was a pain I knew well enough to name, appendix pain, unmistakable, localized, sharp enough to make me feel nauseous. But this was worse. This wasn't the random cruelty of my body betraying me. This was a person weaponizing it. I screamed. It wasn't a calculated sound, not the kind of scream people give in movies. It was raw, uncontrolled, ripped straight from my lungs before I could think. The kind that made the walls seem to vibrate and heads turn in slow motion. For a moment, I forgot about the hijab, the humiliation, the cold fluorescent lights, and focused only on surviving the pain in my gut. My hands flew to my abdomen, doubling me over, every muscle tight as if my body was trying to fold in on itself for protection. And then, before my scream had even fully left my throat, her response came. Not an apology, not a startled step back, not even a trace of recognition that she had hurt me. Security, she barked, as if she had caught me mid-crime instead of mid-agony. Her voice cut through the room like a blade, loud enough to summon anyone within earshot. She's making terrorist threats. For a second, the words didn't register. They floated in the air like smoke. Incomprehensible. Terrorist threats? My mind scrambled to reconcile the absurdity with the reality of what had just happened. I was doubled over, gasping, clutching at my stomach, my scarf gone, my hair exposed. To strangers, and now I was being framed as a danger. The shift in the room was immediate. I could feel it before I saw it. Conversations stopped. The shuffling of papers paused. The room's energy tilted, the way it does when everyone silently agrees to focus on the same thing, my thing. Eyes slid toward me, some openly staring, others peeking from behind phones or clipboards. There was a new kind of heat on my skin now, not just from the embarrassment of exposure, but from the sudden, suffocating awareness of suspicion. My mouth opened, but words refused to form. My brain screamed, say something, defend yourself, but my throat locked up. If I shouted back, I would prove her point in their eyes. If I stayed silent, the accusation would harden in the air like cement. My breaths came in sharp, shallow bursts, my ribs aching from both the scream and the effort to keep from sobbing. The seconds stretched unbearably. I could hear the distant thud of security boots somewhere beyond the hallway, growing louder, more purposeful. I wanted to tell them that I was the one who had been attacked, that the real threat was standing right in front of me, that my hijab had been stolen from my head, that my body was screaming in pain because of her. But even in that desperate moment, I knew how easily my words could be twisted, how quickly the narrative could turn against me. Her face told me everything. She didn't look flustered or regretful. She looked in control. Her chin tilted up slightly, her lips pressed into a thin, satisfied line, her eyes holding mine just long enough to make sure I understood exactly what she was doing. This was no misunderstanding. This was a move. Deliberate, calculated, and perfectly timed. I straightened slowly, my abdomen still throbbing, my exposed hair sticking to the sweat on my neck. I forced myself to meet her gaze, even as every instinct screamed at me to look away, to shrink. My hand tightened into a fist at my side, not because I wanted to hit her, but because I needed something solid to hold on to, something that felt like mine in a moment when everything else had been stripped away, and then the boots arrived. The cold night air bit into my skin as they hauled me toward the sliding glass doors, their grip tight under my arms. I could feel the stairs boring into my back. Patients, nurses, a receptionist frozen mid-sentence, somewhere deep in my chest. Humiliation burned hotter than the pain in my abdomen. The fluorescent light of the lobby fractured across the polished tile floor, creating distorted reflections of my hunched body, as if the room itself wanted to mock me. My hijab, crumpled. From the nurse's rough hands earlier, was stuffed hastily into my coat pocket, strands of hair falling wildly into my face. Every step toward the exit felt like an exile. My bag swung awkwardly against my hip, the strap slipping, the zipper half open. I had been too distracted by pain and disbelief to notice earlier. And then, in the chaos of being yanked forward, something slipped free. A small laminated rectangle, skidding across the floor and stopping against the black shoe of the security guard on my left. He glanced down out of reflex, expecting maybe a driver's license or a credit card. His hand moved almost lazily at first, bending to pick it up. But when his fingers closed over the card and he lifted it into the fluorescent light, something shifted in his face. The casual, almost bored look drained away, replaced by stillness. His His brows drew together. His lips moved silently as he read the name once, then again, as though his eyes were lying to him. "Dr. Amamira Hassan," he said, a loud voice carrying across the suddenly too quiet lobby. And then, with a small pause that felt like it cracked open the air, "Chief of Pediatric Surgery." The words seemed to hang there, suspended, as though the sound itself refused to disperse. I watched his posture straighten, his grip on my arm loosening without him realizing it. Recognition doesn't spread like fire, it spreads like ice. It starts in one place, sharp and cold, and radiates outward. The receptionist's head turned first, a quick glance toward the guard, her eyes widening when they landed on me. A nurse near the triage desk straightened mid-step, her mouth opening slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. A patient in the waiting area, a young mother rocking a feverish toddler, shifted uncomfortably, as if sensing the sudden change in the air. The other guard, still gripping my opposite arm, looked down at the ID, then at me. His jaw worked slowly, as though trying to chew through an impossible thought. "You're her?" he asked, voice pitched low, almost wary. I didn't answer. My throat felt like it had closed entirely. It wasn't that I didn't want to speak, it was that I didn't know which version of myself to answer as. The woman being manhandled toward the street? Or the doctor whose name had once carried enough weight to silence a crowded conference hall? Somewhere behind us, a deep voice murmured, "That can't be right. She trained half the staff here." Another whispered, "I think she performed my niece's surgery." A ripple of hushed voices moved outward from the security station, bouncing from one shocked listener to another. For a moment, I was no longer the patient with the exaggerated pain and the terrorist threats. I was no longer the nameless body in the headscarf they decided to humiliate. I was someone, and they all knew it. But recognition is not the same as rescue. The grip on my arms didn't vanish instantly. My body still throbbed with pain. My hijab was still off. And yet, I could feel the shift, the subtle, uneasy rearranging of the hierarchy in the room. The guard holding my ID cleared his throat, his earlier authority slipping just slightly. "Ma'am," he said, softer now. "Is this you?" I took the ID from his hand. My photo stared back at me. Clean white coat, neat hijab, the confident half-smile I'd practiced for years without even realizing it. My title sat beneath my name in bold, Chief of Pediatric Surgery. I remembered the day the badge was printed. I'd worn it with pride, not knowing that years later, it would become my accidental shield in the middle of a hospital lobby. Behind the glass doors, the wind howled. Inside, every second stretched like a taut thread ready to snap. Someone coughed. A phone rang at the reception desk, unanswered. The nurse who had dismissed my symptoms earlier appeared in the doorway of the hallway, her face pale, her hands clenching the edges of her clipboard, and then, almost imperceptibly, her posture changed. The shift from chaos to urgency happened so quickly it almost didn't feel real. Moments earlier, I had been standing, or rather being half-dragged, in a fluorescent-lit hallway, the taste of humiliation still bitter on my tongue, my body burning with pain that had been dismissed for hours. Now, without warning, the same hands that had gripped my arms like I was a criminal were releasing me to a flood of voices and a blur of medical uniforms. The air seemed to thicken with the sound of clipped instructions and hurried footsteps, and though my mind lagged behind the reality unfolding, I could feel the sudden pivot in the room's energy. It was no longer about me being the woman in the headscarf, no longer about suspicion or dismissal. It was about saving my life. 2 nurses flanked my stretcher as it jolted forward. The wheels squeaked, the frame rattled, and the ceiling lights passed overhead in strobing bursts. My body felt heavy, almost foreign, as if the pain had rooted itself so deep that movement had become something happening to me rather than something I did. Someone's hand brushed my arm, firm, grounding, clinical. They spoke my name with a different inflection now, like they were tasting the syllables for the first time, realizing they belonged to someone who was not just a patient, but a name that carried weight. I caught fragments of conversation around me, words like perforation risk, immediate prep, possible sepsis. I knew the language. I had spoken it myself in urgent corridors like these, though always on the other side of the bed. The operating room doors swung open, releasing a sharp, sterile scent that made my stomach churn. Bright surgical lights glared down from above, their beams unforgiving and almost too white to look at. Shadows clung to the edges of the room, where metal trays stood ready, holding instruments whose outlines I recognized from muscle memory rather than sight. I had wielded some of them myself, long and precise in surgeries that had stretched into the early hours of the morning, but now they were not mine to hold. I was no longer the one dictating the next move. The dissonance was almost unbearable. Voice, calm, practiced, introduced himself as the anesthesiologist, but I barely caught the name. He adjusted a mask above my face, and the smell of the gas was both oddly sweet and suffocating. My heart pounded, not just from the pain, but from the raw awareness of surrendering my body into other hands. Somewhere inside me, the surgeon's instinct still stirred, mentally mapping the incision site, anticipating the steps. My mind wanted to guide them, but my voice had already grown sluggish. There was no room left for control. The edges of the world began to blur, colors bleeding into one another. I caught one last glimpse of a nurse adjusting a monitor, her eyes darting toward me in what looked almost like guilt, before the darkness swallowed everything. Time fractured. There were no clear minutes or hours, only impressions. A low, distant murmur of voices. A mechanical rhythm, steady, unyielding, that could have been a heart monitor. The clink of instruments, metallic and final. A sensation of floating, as if my body were an object being shifted gently from place to place. Somewhere in the haze, I thought I heard someone say my name again. Not the patient, or room 3, but my full name, spoken with the care it deserved. Whether it was real or a trick of the anesthesia, I couldn't couldn't be sure. When I opened my eyes, the light was softer, filtered through a haze that made everything feel just slightly out of reach. The room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the distant hum of air vents. My mouth was dry, my throat raw, and a dull ache pulsed where the incision lay beneath the blankets. A nurse leaned over, her voice low but clear, telling me the surgery was over, that my appendix had been removed just in time. Her words were factual, clinical, but there was something else in her tone, a wariness, maybe even respect, that hadn't been there before. I felt the truth of it in the way she avoided holding my gaze for too long. Relief came in waves, but it was tangled with something sharper, colder. The knowledge that this entire ordeal, every second of unnecessary suffering, had been avoidable if I had been treated like any other patient from the start. My body had survived, but something else had shifted, calcified. The humiliation I had endured in those hours before the operating table had already begun to transform into something harder, more deliberate. The woman who had yanked away my dignity under the guise of authority, who had left me in pain while questioning my credibility, Brenda, would not walk away from this untouched. I lay there, letting the monitors mark the seconds, each steady, beep reminding me that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of action. The exhaustion in my limbs was deep, but my mind was sharpening with every passing moment. Brenda's real reckoning hadn't even started. The surgery had saved my body. Now it was time to tend to something far deeper, restoring the truth of who I was, and ensuring that those who had tried to strip it away would feel the weight of what they'd done.